We are in Joshua chapter 3. We've been going through the Old Testament books. We've made our way from Genesis all the way to Joshua chapter 3. The children of Israel, after being delivered from slavery and bondage, were brought right to the borders of the Jordan. And because of their lack of faith, wandered for an additional 38 years up until this point. Moses has died. Joshua is the new leader that God has ordained. And they've been given instructions to go into the promised land. If you remember last week, 2 spies went in and kind of checked out the area. And there was a woman in Jericho that had faith. So much faith that she was willing to risk her own life in order to protect these 2 spies, knowing that God had already given them the victory over the city of Jericho. They came back with great encouragement, knowing that the people in Jericho were already fearful of them. And now we come to chapter 3. We see Joshua giving instructions to the children of Israel before they cross the Jordan. We're going to attempt to take chapter 3 and chapter 4. They're really closely tied together. It'd be kind of hard to leave it without taking the 4th chapter. And so let's jump in chapter 3 of the book of Joshua. It says, "And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from a cherry grove, and they came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and they lodged there before they crossed over. And so it was, after 3 days, that the officers went through the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priest and the Levites bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you must go. Go, for you have not passed this way before." Now, they're given instructions. And what's incredible, we're going to have 5 different conversations in the first 13 verses. And all of those conversations are between the officers and the children of Israel, Joshua and the children of Israel, Joshua and the Lord. And there's going to be just instructions all the way up until the children of Israel are going to cross the Jordan. And I thought it was an incredible picture, because what God is doing is that he's giving them what they need to know in order to do what he's asking them to do. And it seems that God constantly is trying to instruct his people so that they're able to take what he says and then walk by faith. You see, faith is simply believing what God says and then acting upon it. It's that simple. And the children of Israel are being told some very basic instructions here. They're told them, first of all, there's going to be 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Now, 2,000 cubits. Now, cubits about 18 inches, about 3,000 feet, nearly half a mile, little over half a mile, that the children of Israel would be behind the ark and the priests and the Levites. And God tells them that all of this is so that they would know the way by which you must go. Now, it wasn't going to be that, it wasn't like we don't want you to get lost here. Guys, there's 2 million people. You're not going to go like, where did the priest go? They're out in front of you. Everyone's kind of following behind. Just to kind of put a picture of it, the state of New Mexico has about 2 million people in it. There's upward from 2 million people that are in this camp. I don't know if that kind of gives you a better picture. You can just kind of picture all of Albuquerque, all of Rio Rancho, all of Santa Fe, all of Las Cruces, and all the surrounding cities around it combined is the number of people that we're dealing with here. And he's saying, I want about a half a mile up in front of you. And the reason for this, guys, is because they were to witness God going before them, opening up the Jordan, and knowing that this wasn't some coincidence or accident, that this was the Lord. And I find it amazing that God wants them to know that it's Him guiding them, that it's Him directing them. He's the one who's going to part this river, and He's the one who's going to sustain them as they go over that river. And they're going to need to know that because they're about to go into enemy territory, and there's going to be giants in the land, and there's going to be warriors that are going to be out to battle with. And if they didn't know that God was going before them, they weren't going to make it. And I think that same thing is true for you and I, Christian. Understand something. You're in a spiritual battle. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of darkness. And you're going to be under constant bombardment by the enemy. And if you don't know that God's going before you, man, you're not going to make it. And it's important that you know Him and that you know what it is that He's able to accomplish. This is new territory. They had never walked this way before. They've never crossed the Jordan. They've never been amongst the enemy like they were going to be like now. And God is giving them instruction. Look, this is what you're going to do, and here's why you're going to do it. And then in verse 5, Joshua said to the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." Sanctify yourself. Now, if you remember back in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, there were sanctification ceremonies that they would go through. The whole idea is they were to, wash their clothes, take a bath. In that culture, you didn't take a bath every day. I mean, we're blessed. Really. Water was scarce. You took your monthly shower, you were good. But think if we were go camping and you're a couple days out there and you're just like, man, I'm funky right now. And then you take that hot shower and you're just like, man, you feel like you're a new man, a new woman. So when you have that opportunity to kind of change your clothes and take be cleaned up and washed up, it's like, man, this is and the whole picture here is that we're being cleaned, set apart for this encounter with God. And God wants us to be sanctified, set apart from this world. When we're encountering Him, when we're walking with Him, and our lives are to be set apart from the pollution that this world is involved in. Our life to be set apart from the things that are going on, in moral arena, the immoral arena of our world, our lives to be set apart. And that was the picture. They were to be a set apart people, washed and clean, because they were going to witness God's hand. They were going to witness God's wonders right amongst them. And so he's giving them very clear instructions. First it was the officers telling them, look guys, here's the instructions. Keep about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. You're going to let the priests and Levites go in front of you. Joshua comes in and he said, look, sanctify yourself. You set yourself apart. Washed up, cleaned up, just really expecting God's going to do something in your midst tomorrow. And then look at verse 6 now. Joshua spoke to the priest. Now he's not talking to the general public. Now he's talking to the priest specifically. Those are going to be carrying the ark. He said to them, take up the ark of the covenant, cross over before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant. They went before the people. Now, I think there's something in play here. Everybody had their own part to play. God's giving instructions to the officers, and then instructions to the people, and then instructions to the priest. We're going to see in a moment here, Joshua's going to talk to the children of Israel as a whole. And all of it is everyone doing their part. Everyone and taking the instructions given to them was going to bring success to their venture, to their journey, to the things that God had before them. And I think that's true for the body of Christ. When all of us sit down and go, man, this is my role, this is my responsibility, whether that's in a marriage. Husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. That's your responsibility. Wives, submit to your husband as unto the Lord. Your responsibility. The children, be obedient to your parents. If everyone's taking their role, then there's success. It's true in the church. If everyone's doing what God's asked them to do, then the church is, effective for the kingdom. And now the children of Israel are learning these lessons that, the priest had certain responsibilities. The people had certain responsibilities. The officers had certain responsibilities. And he's giving them these responsibilities. He says, look, you guys are going to get the ark. You're going to carry it on your shoulders. And you're going to walk in front of the children of Israel. And you're going to become the representation. Now, the ark, every time you look into the ark, it was always representative of God's presence. Whenever the ark was in the temple, it was called the holiest of holies because God's presence was there. And the only people allowed to go into there was the high priest, and he would take the blood of the lamb and he would sprinkle it on the ark. Just the whole picture of atonement, the payment for sin, being satisfied. But now they have the ark on the shoulder, and they're going to be walking in front of the people with it. And what's incredible is that up until this point, they've had a pillar of fire at night that would lead them. They would have a cloud every morning there waiting for them. And whenever the cloud would move, they would move. And whatever, the fire would move, they would move. They'd pack up camp and said, all right, follow the fire. That's the Lord. Now that fire is no longer going to lead them. They're going into the promised land, and God's presence was going to be now in the ark. And the priests would be carrying it now. It was more personal. It was now in their midst. And remember what they represent. Remember, Egypt represents the life that we once had in bondage and slavery to sin. They come out of Egypt, but they're not living in obedience. They're just wandering in the desert for 40 years, the cardinal life. No submission, no obedience to the Lord. They're just kind of, walking and wandering, but now they're going to change from that life, freed from bondage, but not in obedience, but now they're going to go into the promised land. And what's going to take? Obedience, faith, trusting the Lord. And God was going to be in their midst now. He's going to be right there amongst them. as they go into the promised land. Not a distant fire, not a distant cloud. He's going to be right there in the middle of them. You see, God doesn't just take us out of Egypt. He takes us into the promised land. That's his desire for your Christian life. God doesn't go, I just want to free him from Egypt. He doesn't just want to save you so that you can, go to heaven. He wants you to walk by faith so he can accomplish what he designed you for. He wants you to walk in it. He wants to be in the midst of it. He wants to be the one leading your life. And what's amazing is that the priests are now given the instructions. This is how it's going to go down. You're just going to be carrying that. And then notice what happens. Happens in verse 7. And the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all of Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. You shall command the priest to bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan. Now, God is telling Joshua, you are going to be established among the people, and it's this picture of they're going to understand that I'm the one guiding you and I'm the one directing you. God exalts Joshua in the midst of the people. Now, the exaltation, Joshua being exalted didn't mean that, Joshua was going to be praised or worshiped or anything like that. It was that now the people are going to know that God is guiding Joshua's decisions. That God is the one who's giving him the instructions in order to give to the people so that they are able now to follow him. And if you have a leader that you're following, you better know that they're hearing from God. That they're spending time with God. That God is giving them instructions, and the evidence is, God's hand and God's working in that person's life. And I find that Joshua here is going to be exalted amongst the people, and they're going to know that God is the one who's going before them. And again, I think important that they understand not only is God going before them, but the man that's been entrusted to leading them is someone who's hearing from God. And so God's going to establish that in Joshua. And I love what he tells Joshua too. He says, get the priests and tell them that you're going to get the ark, you're going to carry it, and you're going to walk right into the middle of the Jordan with it. Guys, that's scary. We're going to find out that the Jordan was overflowing its banks. They're saying when the Jordan at that time would have been flowing, at harvest time, it would be a mile wide. It would be white cap. It would be, the river flowing at a very rapid pace. And you're standing there for 3 days watching this river and you're going, yeah, right. We're going to get past that. Now, how's that going to happen again? Are we building arks for the next 3 days? I mean, boats? I mean, what's a bridge? I mean, how's this going to go down? I think God put them for 3 days on the end of that Jordan just to look at it and to watch it so that they would realize that unless God shows up, there's no way we're going to get over there. Now, how many boats would you have to make? A mile long, build a bridge, how long would that take? And yet, God has them sitting there just looking at this roaring river. Now, if you go to the Jordan today, whenever you get a chance to make it to Israel, you go to the Jordan, it's kind of like, like the Rio Grande. With the Rio Grande when it's low. It really isn't what It used to be. Now, I understand that at one point the Rio Grande was, a river to reckon with. Now it's like a trickle, right? But what's incredible is as you look at this whole picture, is God is telling them, look, you're going to get that ark, and you're going to have those priests walk right into the middle of it. Faith has to act even when it doesn't make sense to the natural inclinations. Faith is something when God gives instructions that it doesn't matter what it looks like. If God said it, then I'm going to begin to do it. And the results are in God's hands, not in my hands. And that's what God is going to teach the children of Israel. If you'll just trust me, if you'll just obey the things that I've instructed you, then you're going to see wonders and you'll see God work. And I'll tell you this, Christian, if you do the same, you take what God says and you go, man, that's truth. I need to apply that truth to my life. You're going to see God do miracles. You'll see God do the impossible. You'll see wonders, just like the children of Israel saw wonders. Because we serve a God who's more than able to handle whatever circumstance or whatever situation that you're facing. All he's looking for you is to believe him. All he's looking for us is to trust him. And the leaders, if the leaders weren't going to trust him, how are the people going to trust him? And God tells the leaders, the priests, he said, you're going to carry that ark, you're going to put your feet in the water. Check this out. You're going to stand in the Jordan. Look at verse 9. And Joshua said to the children of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man from every tribe, and it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priest who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, and the waters that come down from upstream, they shall stand as a heap. Now, I love Joshua's conversation with the children of Israel. Remember in the earlier verse it says, God said to Joshua, Joshua, I'm going to exalt you. And do you know what Joshua does? He exalts the Lord. Joshua wasn't looking for any exaltation for himself. He wanted to point everybody to Jesus, everyone to God. And I love how he does it. He says, let me tell you guys, you're going to know that the living God is among you. The living God. Now, in Egypt and all of the Canaanite land and everywhere they were going, they had a bunch of dead gods. They had gods that couldn't speak. They had gods that couldn't act. They had gods that couldn't respond. But you have the living God, and he's right here amongst you, and you're going to get the opportunity to watch him work. And if you see God work here, you're going to know that he's able to handle not only the Jordan River that seems like a big obstacle, but he's going to be able to handle all of these other enemies that you're going to face. The Canaanite, Hittites, Hivites, Amorites, Jebusites, all of these guys. He can handle all of these guys. And guys, there's something that happens when you see God work in one circumstance that gives you the confidence that God can work in the next circumstance. If you'll trust him in one thing, then you go, man, look what God did last time. I can trust him. That's why God always takes us in baby steps of faith, right? He doesn't ask you to do something that's way outside of your ability. They take the baby step. And then you look back and go, man, God was able to handle that step. Now I can take 2 steps. And, he's building your faith. And sometimes it's even you watching the faith of others that gives you enough faith to actually respond to. And they were going to watch these priests carry the ark right into the Jordan River. And he says, when you watch God do what he's going to do, know this, the living God is going to go before you. And he's going to defeat all of your enemies. He's going to wipe out all of those who come against you. And then he says there, and I love it again, in verse 13, he says, it's the Lord of all the earth. He's the Lord of all the earth. The Lord of all the earth. He's in control of everything that transpires. And understand that a little bit of water isn't an obstacle for God. A lot of water is not an obstacle for God. He's going to dry up the Jordan. It's going to stand in a heap. And as you're reading it through, it's cool because it says it stopped all the way at Adam, which would have been about 16 miles upriver. And it just stopped at a heap there at Adam, and it emptied out going toward the Dead Sea. But here's the incredible thing. It was dry ground as the children of Israel cross over. You ever walked in like along a river that's been saturated for forever? It's kind of soggy and soft, and you kind of sink in. And guys, this wasn't some natural disaster that happened. This was a supernatural event that took place. It was on dry land that they're going to cross over. And he's giving them the instructions on all of these things. Guys, this is how it's going to go down. This is how it's going to look. And I think he comes to the end of the instructions. And verse 14 to the end of chapter 3 is the action. And I think that's significant for this simple reason, guys, is that God will always give us the instructions before he asks us to take the actions. God wants us to know how to walk, where to walk, when to walk. He wants the instructions to be poured into our life so that now when you act upon those things, you're going to know that he's the one who's directed you there. 2 Timothy 3:16, it says this, all scripture is given by the inspiration of God. That word inspiration of God means it's God-breathed. The pneuma of God. Theopneuma, the God's breath. And it says that all scripture has been given by the breath of God, and it is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. What? So that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. You see, God has given us his breath, his word, so that you can be complete, so that you can do the work that he's asked you to do, the action that he's asked you to do. And what's amazing is that all in Israel know what the next day was going to look like, what they were going to be responsible for. He says, I want you to get 12 guys, one from each tribe, and he's going to give them further instructions as they take the next step. We'll find here in chapter 4 that these guys were to get stones and carry those stones in a heap on the side and a heap in the middle, 2 heaps of stones that were going to be in the Jordan and one outside of the Jordan, so that they would always remember what God had done. You see, it was all of these little details that was accomplishing what God desired to do. Get those 12 guys ready, one from each tribe. You guys, watch the ark go into the water. The priest, you guys do what you're supposed to do. You walk into the water. And it was those steps of faith, just as the act of obedience, was going to bring them to this point that they are watching the wonders of God transpire right before them. Notice what happens in verse 14. It says, so it was, when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan, that the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and as those who bore the Ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priest who bore the Ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflew all of its banks during the whole time of the harvest, and the waters which came down from the upstream stood still. They rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zeredin. So the waters that went down into the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite of Jericho. Now, can you imagine what the people at Jericho are thinking now? They're there on the top of the wall, Rahab and all of the inhabitants, they're just kind of watching. What are all those people doing? They're crazy. There's got to be a couple million of those people. And then all of a sudden they're right at the edge. They go, the priest. I mean, it's only about 12 miles from the Jordan. On a clear day, that'd be easy to see. They see the Ark of the Covenant. Remember, it was covered in gold, kind of glistering in the sun. And they just kind of see this guy walking into he's walking into with their ark. I mean, and then all of a sudden they see that whole thing dry up. And the priests walk right in the middle. And then here comes 2 million people kind of walking across, the kids, the grandkids. Their dogs, calves, cows. I mean, they're just kind of kicking, just walking across the Jordan. And all of Jericho are going, oh, we're in trouble now. And the children of Israel, all of them watching God's hand. Now remember back when Moses parted the Red Sea? He opened his staff and the water parted on both sides, and the children of Israel walked on dry ground again. And then as soon as they get over, the Egyptians decide they're going to follow them because obviously the water dried up and they follow them, and then the water comes back right over them and they all drown in the Red Sea. A miracle. It wasn't some, accident or it wasn't an earthquake that caused it or just it was just the wind. It was just the wind. The wind parts the sea all the time. No, it was God. And he was exalting Moses because Moses was going to lead the show. Now he's exalting Joshua because Joshua is going to be leading him into a battle. And what's incredible is that the Lord's the one being exalted in all of it because they've seen the mighty hand of God work. And what's incredible is that all of these events taking place were just simply teaching the children of Israel that walking by faith is just simply obeying what God instructed. And it hasn't changed. 2,500 years later, guys, it hasn't changed. Walking by faith is just simply obeying the things that God's instructed. That's all he's looking for. And when he finds that man or that woman that's willing to obey his word, man, he begins to take that person, he begins to use them for his glory. They get to the middle of the Jordan, the priest with the ark. Look what happens in verse 17. The priest who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all of Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. And it came to pass, chapter 4, when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, take for yourself 12 men from the people, one man from every tribe. Command them, saying, take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm, and you shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. And Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God in the midst of the Jordan. Each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that it may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Now, do you remember earlier, before they ever crossed, Joshua was instructed, get 12 guys, one from every tribe, and just have them on standby. Now they're in the middle of Jordan. He goes, hey, those 12 guys I told you to tell them to get a rock, get a stone. Carry that stone over to the side, and it's going to be memorial stones for you guys. And I love that it wasn't until they were in the middle of the Jordan that God tells them what their job was going to be or why he had asked them to do that. Because I think it's oftentimes God's not going to tell you the next step until you obey the first one. God's not going to show you, what's going to happen a year down the road or 5 years. He's just going to tell you, do this now. And I'll show you the next step tomorrow, and I'll show you the next step the next day. And you see, it's just active obedience that God's looking for. And they are instructed to carry that stone. They were to take it all the way to the place that they lodged. Look at verse 4. Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed with the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God in the midst of the Jordan. Each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. This may be a sign among you when your children ask you to come, in time to come, what do the stones mean to you? And you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the Lord, before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever. So that they would never forget what God had done. Memorial stones. Kids see, 12 stones piled on each other. What is that? What are those 12 stones for? If you have kids, you know exactly that's how it goes down. What's that? Why? Who put them there? When did they get there? And your kids are going to ask you, what's up with those stones? And you're going to tell them, let me tell you what those stones mean. We were in the middle of that river. We were standing right there, and we grabbed the stones right out of there, and we carried them. I mean, you just love to hear those stories of what God had done. And they're going to be reminded that God had brought them from the other side of that Jordan over to this side of the Jordan. And that he had brought them on dry ground. And guys, I think there's something here for us as parents, that we need to be talking about the things that God has done in our lives to our children. There needs to be memorial stones in our lives that we go, man, let me tell you what God did when he saved me. Let me tell you what God did when I was serving him in this area or this area. Because our kids need to know that we serve a living God. That he's the God of all the earth. And when you tell them what God's done in your life, man, that gives them the ability to understand that this God isn't just some God afar off, but he is a God that's near. That he's able to intervene in anybody's life if they would just call out to him and they would seek after him. They would obey him and follow him. And the kids would come and ask, what are those stones for? Let me tell you, we were right there. We were on that side. We were in Egypt. We came 30, 40 years that we got to the Jordan, and God opened it up. I watched it. I saw it. I was there. It was amazing to see God work. And as they got those memorial stones, watch this. Verse 8, the children of Israel did so. just as Joshua commanded, took up the 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan. The Lord had spoken to Joshua according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, and he carried them over with them to the place where they had lodged, and they laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priest who bore the Ark of the Covenant stood, and they are there to this day. Now, I would love to find that. Wouldn't that be cool? You go to the Jordan and you just kind of, hey, there's 12 stones down here. I imagine one day that's going to be discovered. You know, there's going to be just a heap of 12 stones. And you know, maybe it's not till the millennial kingdom that's going to happen and God heals all of this. But, you know, right there in the middle of the Jordan, they put another heap. And they were reminded that they stood right in the middle. Not just on the border, but right in the midst. God had brought them there. Great reminders. There's memorial stones in my life that, I look back on the day I was saved, the day God had put a burden in my heart for ministry and for Belen, and there's times, they're just ingrained in my heart. The promises that God had given me before I ever moved out here. Watching God go from place to place and from facility, and just watching, and I look back and remembering how God was faithful in the middle of all of it. And it reminds me, because sometimes when you hit some new trials, you go, man, if God's been this faithful back here, He's surely going to be that faithful in the things that I'm facing today. Guys, build those memorial stones in your own life. Jot them down. Remind yourself of them. Because they're going to give you the reminder that you need. How many times does God tell us to remember what He did for us on the cross? Like every time we partake of communion together, what is it doing? It's a remembrance. It's a reminder how much God loves you, what He did to pay for you by dying, shedding His body, shedding His blood, offering His body for your sins. It's that memorial. It's that remembrance. It's that idea of, man, look what God's done for me. That's why when we partake of communion, it's a special time, because we're remembering what God has accomplished. And I think those events in your life, man, are important events to remember, to go back and reflect upon. Tell them to your kids, to your grandkids, of God's great power and God's great might. And He's told them here, and to this point, look, you guys are going to take those stones. Look at verse 10. The priest who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan, verse 10, until everything was finished, and the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people according to all that had commanded Joshua. Moses had commanded Joshua, and the people hurried and crossed over. And it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people, and the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh crossed over, armed before the children of Israel, as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 prepared for war crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plain of Jericho. Now remember, there was the 2.5 tribes who settled inland off the Jericho a little bit. Those 2.5 tribes that decided, we really don't want to go into the promised land. The land that we're living in is pretty good land. We have cattle. There's plenty of vegetation here. There's plenty of water here. To go into the promised land, it's going to be too much trouble. So we'll just kind of stay here on the other side of the Jordan. And 40,000 of their men, now it's about a third of the warriors that were supposed to go over, 2/3 stood back. and their wives and their children. But 40,000 of them went. Now, what a sad decision that those 2.5 tribes made. Their kids didn't get to see the Jordan open up. Their wives, the other 80,000 men that had stood back, didn't get to watch God work in the same way. So, down the road, the little, 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds are going to, be talking about, man, do you remember when God did that? And those on the other side, they didn't even have that memory. They had nothing to look back on, because they were more concerned about their comfort. They were more concerned about their cattle and their wealth than they were about going to the place that God had created for them. And you look at that and you go, man, what a tragedy. Why would someone want to settle for second best when God's got his best for you? Why would you not want to be in the promised land where God's presence was? Where God was working, where God was moving, where God was showing his might and power. Why would you settle for something less? We find out that they were the first ones to be compromised, defeated, influenced by all the other nations and their idolatry. You see, God is looking for his best for your life and my life. But it really comes down to obedience. Are you willing to walk by faith? Are you willing to trust him? Are you willing to do the things that he instructs and then go, man, that's what God said. I don't know how it's going to happen, but if God said it, he's going to make it happen. I'm just going to do what he said. And it's amazing because they get to this point, the 40,000 cross over with them. And it tells us there in verse 14, and on that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all of Israel, and they feared him as they feared Moses all the days of his life. And the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, command the priests who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. And Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, come up from the Jordan. And it came to pass, when the priest who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priest's feet touched the dry ground, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all of its banks as before. Now, there's some scholars who go, well, lots of times what happens is that there's earthquakes that happen in the region, and it's been noted back in 1920-something, there was an earthquake, and the Jordan stopped for about 8 hours, and it must have been some earthquake that happened. Guys, this is not an earthquake. This is the Lord. Because what we do know is that it didn't stop until the priest puts his foot in, and it didn't come back until the priest took his foot out. And what were the priests carrying? The ark. What was the ark? It was God's presence. Well, it was just a coincidence that whenever the earthquake hit, whenever the priest's foot hit the water, and then it all came back when the priest's foot came out of the water. I mean, you got more faith than I do to think that this could be an accident. This was God working. And the children of Israel were very aware of when that water stopped and when the water started again. It's as soon as the priest put his foot in, and as soon as his priest took his foot out. And it amazes me, man, how God would demonstrate his power over the earth. And it's as they come out, and notice verse 19 here. I love it. And the people came up from the Jordan, the earth, and the 10th day, from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. And he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their father in time to come, saying, what are these stones? You shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land, and the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. And the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we crossed over, that all the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Isn't that cool? Now, Gilgal is going to become a very important place for the children of Israel. We'll see that it's there that they're going to be circumcised in Gilgal, the cutting away of the flesh. As they come out of this life of, wandering and disobedience and lack of faith, they come over, and the very first thing that God's going to do is they get into the Jordan, he's going to tell them, okay, now, guys, your obedience begins in the land. And they're going to be given instructions that all of the male in the camp, all of the warriors in the camp, we're all going to be circumcised. Man, we'll get into that next week. What an incredible demonstration of faith again. Incredible demonstration of faith. Now, the last thing you want to do if you're going to go to war and you're in the enemy's camp is to circumcise all your warriors. Not a good thing. Because basically they're going to be on the mend for a little while. They're not swinging a sword. I'll tell you that right now. They're going to be recovering for a little while. And that makes them what? Vulnerable to the enemy. But if God says obey, then what were they to do? Live by faith. Didn't make sense. I mean, that if we were going to get certain, let's do that on the other side of the Jordan, duh. God going, no, you're going to have to trust me now. You're going to have to walk by faith. And it seems to be the lesson that God is teaching the children of Israel. Remember, in their first battle to Jericho, God's going to tell them, go and walk around Jericho 7 times. On the 7th time, I want you guys to all blow your horn and scream. That's going to be, what a great military strategy. It wasn't about them, it was about the Lord. And it was about obedience. Are you going to do what I've asked you to do? Because if you do what I've asked you to do, I'll bring the victory to you. It's just, are you going to do what I've instructed you to do, even if it doesn't make sense in the natural? You guys, let me tell you something. Mom and Dad, God is wanting you to live by faith so that your children can see God work. And it's not always going to make sense in the natural. It's going to be a supernatural thing. And all of these are, I love, and what an incredible thing. He says, when your children ask their fathers. Because what's the instinct of a child to go to dad? Because dad's supposed to be leading spiritually. I think one of the problems we're seeing in our nation right now is that we have fathers that aren't there, or they're not leading their family spiritually, and we're seeing the ramifications of a whole generation growing up without even having an influence of dad. What does it produce? That's where the spiritual leadership was supposed to come from. When the children asked Dad, what happened? Father, what are those stones all about? The dad was supposed to go, look, let me tell you, God because Dad was given the responsibility of leadership in the home. And all of these pictures that he's laying out for us, man, are all pictures so that what we would also learn to walk by faith, to walk in obedience, to do those things that God's asked of us. And then when you do, man, you like the children of Israel, get to see God work. You get to see God manifest his power, his might, his strength in the life of your children, in the life of your family. It's exciting. It's exciting to see God work. Every once in a while, I'll sit down with my kids as they're growing up, and I'll tell them how God had saved me, where I was before I was saved, what God had, called me to Belen, and I'd love to just to tell them, because I want them to know too. I want them to know we serve a God who's living, and a God who's able, and a God who loves us. And he's able to handle whatever circumstance that you and I are up against.